I never thought that a birthday dinner could end up being a receipt for betrayal. On the evening of October 3rd, I sat alone in my Decatur condo with a cooling bowl of beef stew and an untouched slice of cornbread when my phone buzzed Amex alert, $483 charged at Bones Steakhouse. My son Elijah's favorite spot. That's where he'd taken his fiancée last year to celebrate landing that marketing job he held for all of 6 months. I hadn't been invited then either. But what hit hardest wasn't the dollar amount or the silence. It was the timestamp, 6:41 p.m. Same hour, I'd lit a candle for myself and listened to Nina Simone hum through my radio speakers like balm for old scars. The card was still under my name, still tied to the joint emergency account I'd opened back when he lost his first apartment. He said he'd never touch it without asking. Said it made him feel secure just knowing it's there. I never gave him permission to feel entitled to my peace, and I sure didn't authorize him to drop nearly $500 on ribeyes and top-shelf whiskey while I heated leftovers alone. I opened the banking app. The charges rolled out like bruises I didn't know I had. One from earlier that day at a wine shop in Buckhead, another at a spa booking site 2 days prior. All of them on my card. None of them mine. The Bones charge was just the garnish. No missed call. No voicemail. No, "Happy birthday, Ma." Just silence. And a steakhouse tab that read like a toast I wasn't invited to. I clicked dispute this charge, but stopped before submitting. I needed records, screenshots, dates, full documentation. This couldn't be another family blow-up with me crying on one end and him promising to fix it on the other. I wasn't going to plead. I was going to build a case. So I set the bowl aside, powered up my desktop, and began downloading the last 6 months of statements. Category by category, I highlighted anything that bore Elijah's name or matched his favorite spots. By the time the clock hit midnight, I had a 12-page PDF of financial disrespect and a bone-deep ache I couldn't name yet. But I knew this much. This year, I wasn't the one getting older for nothing. 3 days before that charge at Bones, I'd already felt the warning hum of neglect. My 68th birthday came and went without a voice on the line. I'd woken early that Sunday, pressed my robe, brewed coffee strong enough to sting the tongue, and set 2 mugs on the counter out of habit. The second one cooled untouched, the same way the phone sat silent beside it. I watched the sky shift through the blinds, each hour another small insult. No text, no message, not even a lazy emoji from Elijah pretending to care. The only buzz that came through before noon was the bank's routine activity alert, a detail I ignored at first because I still wanted to believe he'd remember before evening. By 1 o'clock, I'd set aside my pride and baked a small lemon pound cake, the kind my late husband used to say tasted like sunshine and faith. I cut a slice, sang a quiet happy birthday to myself, and promised that next year would be different. When I finally checked my account, it was out of restlessness more than suspicion. What I found felt like a slap delivered with a smile. 2 new transactions, both in Buckhead, one at the Pearl Nail Spa, $127, the other at a boutique hotel bar called the St. Regis, $215. The timestamps told their own story, one mid-morning, one around brunch. My son, or whoever he was becoming, had celebrated my birthday by indulging himself on my dime. I sat back in the chair and let the facts settle. No storm, no raised voice, just the realization that love alone doesn't earn respect. I opened a notebook I kept for household records and started listing every purchase tied to that card in the past month. I wrote each amount, date, and location with slow precision, leaving space beside each for verification. Then, with a calm I didn't yet trust, I logged into my Citizens Trust online account and clicked Flag for Review. A prompt asked me to confirm possible misuse. My hand didn't shake when I typed yes. By the time evening fell, I had my confirmation email, time-stamped and archived. I didn't delete it or forward it. I simply printed it and placed it in a new file folder labeled in bold ink, Elijah Account Activity. By the time I printed that confirmation email, the truth had already been whispering at me for months. Elijah's borrowing had started small, little slips that looked harmless when I still believed in his good intentions. Back in February, A $1,100 gas bill landed in my mailbox with my name on the account and his old apartment address still listed. When I called him, he acted surprised, said the utility company must have mixed something up, that he'd handle it. He didn't. I ended up paying it to keep the account from going to collections, even though it was his heat, his shower, his lights flicking on at night while I clipped coupons to make my own ends meet. Then came the watch, a gold bulova his father wore every Sunday, kept in a velvet box on my dresser since the funeral. I noticed it gone in late May when I was dusting, the box empty except for the folded warranty card. When I asked Elijah about it, he swore he hadn't seen it, said maybe I'd misplaced it. I wanted to believe him. I searched drawers, coat pockets, even the glove compartment of my car. But I knew the truth. That watch had been his father's pride, and Elijah always liked how it looked on his wrist. By summer, the signs were no longer whispers. They were paperwork. The final straw came as a voicemail from Capital One, cheery and professional, offering congratulations for my pre-approval on a personal loan. The woman said I could access up to $20,000 with one simple signature. I never applied for any loan. When I called back, the agent said someone had entered my Social Security number online, tied to my home address. It might be a family member, she said carefully, as if she already knew. I thanked her, requested the case ID, and wrote it down in red ink beside the date. After hanging up, I sat at my dining table surrounded by folders, bills, and silent proof that trust had been leaking out of my life, one small favor at a time. The weight of it pressed down, but so did clarity. I wasn't losing control. I'd simply been too polite to claim it. That night, I slid all the documents into a manila envelope labeled Fraud Indicators and placed it beside my Bible. I figured both were about faith, one in God, the other in myself. By Friday morning, I was no longer pacing around the problem. I dressed in navy slacks, buttoned my coat with both hands, and tucked the file folder under my arm like a legal summons. Citizens Trust Bank on Auburn Avenue opened at 9 a.m., but I was parked outside by 8:43, watching the tellers unlock the doors and prepare for another day of other people's business. I wasn't anyone's business anymore. Not Elijah's convenience, not the family's peacemaker, not some generous relic of a mother too kind to lock the vault. Ms. Lorraine greeted me by name. She always did, wore her hair in a tight bun, and remembered people by what they were fighting to keep: marriages, homes, inheritance, dignity. She led me to the side desk, the one reserved for privacy and quiet damage control. I laid out the folder and spoke plainly. I need to freeze my card. It's being abused. And I want a fraud report filed, with my son listed. I expected hesitation. Instead, she reached for a pen. We'll need your ID, the last four of your social, and your signature on this form. No questions about family. No lecture about resolving things privately. Just process. I handed over everything, and while she typed into the terminal, I removed the auto-pay list I'd brought with me: insurance, water, the security company, and read them out loud, asking each to be disconnected. She nodded after every name, clicking through my financial life like a nurse unhooking a patient from unnecessary machines. When she asked for the suspected party's name and relationship, I didn't flinch. Elijah Thompson, my son. She didn't pause, just typed. It wasn't coldness. It was protocol, and I appreciated it more than sympathy. She printed the receipt confirming the freeze, the pending investigation, and the cancellation of all linked payments. I'll add this to the internal fraud report. If the card was used at ATMs, you may be able to request surveillance later. That stuck with me. Not because I needed proof, my gut had already ruled, but because proof makes the truth portable. I could take it out, lay it down, show it to others when the story got messy or met with disbelief. At 10:12 a.m., I walked out of that bank, holding the receipt, the folder, and a name finally spoken out loud in the correct context, not as my child, but as the one who'd crossed the line. That same afternoon, I took the East Side Drive to Monroe and Webb, just past the MARTA station, where the sidewalk always cracked in the same places. Attorney Glenn Monroe was already expecting me. We'd met 3 months prior at Ebenezer's legal clinic during a quiet Wednesday session on elder fraud and property rights. He had a deep voice, neat notes, and the kind of patience that didn't make you feel old for asking the same question twice. When I stepped into his office with my file folder, he didn't waste time on small talk. Just motioned to the seat across from his desk and said, "Let's get started." I handed over the documents, printed statements, screenshots, Capital One transcript, the flagged gas bill, and the handwritten log I'd kept since Sunday. He moved through each item slowly, pausing now and then to jot something on a legal pad. When he got to the Buckhead charges, he frowned. When he saw the gas bill, he circled the date. "This isn't just misuse," he said. "It's a pattern, financial exploitation, and he's betting you won't escalate." I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. The facts spoke louder than any mother's doubt ever could. After 15 minutes of review, he opened a blank template on his screen. "We'll draft a letter of intent. It's not a lawsuit. Not yet. But it's the first step. If he returns the funds within the window we set, 10 business days, we won't need to proceed further. If he doesn't, we escalate." He read each line aloud as he typed. Clear language. No guilt. No suggestion. Just numbers, evidence, and consequence. The amount to be repaid, itemized by date and source. A note about trust erosion. A reminder that failure to comply would lead to a formal claim. At the bottom, my full name and Glenn's firm information. He slid a printed copy across the desk for my signature. I signed without hesitation. By 3:45 p.m., the letter was scanned, time-stamped, and emailed to Elijah's address on file. A printed copy went into an envelope for certified delivery. I left the office with one undeniable thing, the beginning of a paper trail he couldn't sweet-talk his way out of. Sunday afternoon, I decided to tackle the side desk drawer in the living room, the one I'd been meaning to clean for over a year. It had become a dumping ground for expired warranties, dried-out pens, and receipts faded to ghost ink. I wasn't searching for anything in particular, just trying to make space, but what I found slid the ground just an inch out from under me. Near the back, folded into a stiff, yellowed envelope from a long-lapsed dental policy, was a neon green Post-it. The handwriting jumped out immediately, looped 2s, a slanted 9, the heavy underline beneath the final number. I didn't even need to read it twice. It was my old 4-digit PIN, the one I'd used for over a decade. The one I'd only ever written down once, years ago, then torn up when I changed purses. He had written it. Elijah. I knew his numbers the way I knew his voice when he was lying. Too smooth, too steady, trying too hard to pass as calm. I held the Post-it between 2 fingers like it might burn me. It didn't scream. It didn't need to. It whispered. He had it all along. That meant the ATM withdrawals weren't just digital mishaps or saved autofill accidents. He'd punched in that number by hand. He'd stood at some machine, somewhere in the city, used the card I paid bills with, and keyed in a code he wasn't supposed to know. A code he had no right to write down in my house, let alone keep. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just brought the note into the kitchen, laid it beside my printed statements, and took a photo with my phone. Then I placed it into a Ziploc bag and added it to the fraud indicators folder, now fat enough to press flat with a palm. It was no longer a suspicion, no longer guesswork. This was proof in his own hand. At 5:12 p.m., I sent Attorney Monroe the photo with the subject line, "Additional physical evidence, handwritten PIN." Within 10 minutes, he replied, "Received and saved. We'll include it with the complaint packet if necessary." I didn't delete the email. I started. Monday morning, I was back at Citizens Trust before the lunch crowd, this time with a new question and a bolder posture. I wore my gray wool coat and brought both folders, one labeled Account Activity, the other now titled Evidence Ongoing. I didn't wait in line. I walked straight to Ms. Lorraine's window and asked to speak about the September 29th withdrawal. "Midtown ATM, 2:36 p.m., I said, As I handed her the fraud report number and my ID, she led me into the same small glass-walled office as before. Her expression didn't change when I mentioned surveillance footage, but I could see her processing it, quick and calm. She typed into the internal system while I explained the handwritten PIN, the disputed charge, and the window of time. I watched her screen light up with terminal codes and transaction logs. She confirmed the withdrawal was made at their machine near the Midtown MARTA entrance, camera-enabled, fully operational that day. I can request the footage for internal review. We don't release it directly, but if this goes to legal, your attorney can subpoena the records, she said, already pulling the form. I signed without needing to think it over. This wasn't about catching him red-handed. It was about stacking truth until denial had nowhere left to sit. If that tape showed him standing at that ATM, entering my PIN, that was enough for any court, and more than enough for me. She added the footage request to my claim file and gave me a stamped copy of the submission. It usually takes 5 to 7 business days, she said, folding the receipt neatly. I nodded and slipped it into the second folder, the one I kept zipped and flat in my tote. As I walked out, I paused at the front doors. Midtown wasn't far. I could have gone to the machine myself, stood where he had stood, stared into the camera lens like a ghost tracing a crime scene. But I didn't need to be near the act to feel the damage. I just needed to keep walking the trail until every step he took on my name came back stamped, filed, and undeniable. That evening, just after 7, I finally called Elijah. Not to accuse, not to beg. I wanted to hear the voice behind the pattern, see if there was even a trace of guilt hiding in the pauses. He picked up on the third ring, his tone bright, like I'd interrupted a game or a joke. "Hey, Ma, what's going on?" No hesitation, no sign that a letter of intent had landed in his inbox that afternoon. I asked one question. "Did you go to Bones Steakhouse last Thursday?" There was a beat, just long enough to reveal calculation. Then the laugh came. Casual, low, like we were sharing something. "You know I wouldn't have money like that unless I had help," he said, as if it were a compliment, as if my stolen credit line were proof of our bond. He shifted the tone fast, too fast. "Come on, Ma, it's not that serious. I've been meaning to talk to you about everything. I was going to pay it back, I swear." He stretched the word like it could cover weeks of silence, thousands of dollars, the missing watch, the pin in his handwriting. Each sentence slipped into the next with that same syrupy ease, half apology, half dare. But I didn't argue. I didn't list the charges or remind him what day it had been. I kept my voice steady and told him, "I've already taken the necessary steps. This is not a conversation, it's a courtesy call." He started to say something else, but I ended it with a simple, "You'll receive everything in writing." Hanging up didn't feel like slamming a door. It felt like placing the final lock. I sat for a moment in the stillness, staring at the phone, not because I expected another ring, but because I was remembering all the times I'd waited for one that never came. Birthdays, Mother's Days, anniversaries of his father's passing. Always excuses. Always meant to. This time, the silence that followed didn't sting. It confirmed I was no longer holding space for fantasy. I picked up the folder, added a new sheet titled Phone Call, October 8th, 7:06 p.m., and wrote down everything he said, word for word. After the call, I didn't sleep. My body went through the motions, washed the dishes, folded laundry, fed the cat, but my mind stayed locked on the details. I'd been connecting dots for days, but now I wanted the full picture. Not impressions, not hunches, evidence. So I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, my phone, and the last 3 months of digital statements open on the laptop. By midnight, I had 6 new charges that hadn't raised alarms before. A barber payment at Uppercuts in Midtown, Elijah's usual spot, $54. 2 stops at Pond City Market, one at a sneaker store, one at a small bistro, both in the same afternoon. A Lululemon charge, which told me he wasn't just buying for himself. He didn't do yoga. Someone in his life, maybe Risa, was benefiting too. I opened our old text threads, threadbare at this point, but still intact. His messages matched the timestamps. A quick, "Yo, Ma, What time do you usually go to the bank? Sent an hour before one of the bigger ATM withdrawals. A random check-in text? You good? Exactly 10 minutes after the St. Regis charge. I took screenshots of every relevant one, labeled them, and attached them to a fresh email addressed to Attorney Monroe. Subject line: Supplemental evidence. Confirmed pattern of unauthorized use. In the body of the message, I laid it out plainly. Date, location, amount, and behavioral clue. Like breadcrumbs through a house of cards he thought would never fall. I wasn't speculating anymore. I was matching time against motive, habit against harm. Before I hit send, I sat back and looked at the folder in front of me. What had started as a nagging feeling was now a compiled, time-stamped record that couldn't be waved away. Every charge bore his print. Every line item chipped away at whatever trust I'd been preserving out of habit or fear. At 1:27 a.m., I sent the email. The receipt pinged within seconds. I opened a clean envelope, printed out the full message, and filed it under a new tab in the binder I'd started. Ongoing damages, digital and physical. One more wall built. One less place for him to hide. I'd almost forgotten the family trust. Not because it wasn't important. It was, but because it had always felt protected by silence and distance. My late husband set it up before the cancer returned, his last act of structure and foresight. It wasn't large, but it was sacred. Meant for emergencies, legacy decisions, the grandchildren's future. Elijah wasn't a trustee. He wasn't even supposed to know the account number, let alone how to access it. But on Wednesday morning, while sorting through the mail, I opened the latest monthly statement from Trident Wealth. I didn't think much of it at first, just another envelope to file. Then I saw the withdrawals. 2 transfers, one for $5,000, another for $4,000. Both listed under moving expenses. Both directed to a checking account ending in digits I didn't recognize. I froze, squinting at the routing numbers, hoping for a misprint. Then I saw the memo line on one. R. McKinley/relocation. RISA. I didn't feel rage, not right away. What I felt was betrayal brushed in arrogance. The assumption that I would never check. That I was too old, too trusting, too sentimental to protect what was mine. They hadn't just dipped into my day-to-day funds anymore. They'd reached for the bone marrow. A sacred fund, touched without consent, named without permission. I went to my records cabinet and pulled out the original trust agreement. Elijah's name didn't appear anywhere except in the beneficiary clause, alongside his brother and 2 grandchildren. He had no right to request anything, and no authority to execute a transfer. I dug deeper into my files, cross-referenced the transaction dates, then circled them in red. That night, I emailed Monroe again, subject line, urgent breach of family trust. I attached the statement, the highlighted clauses of the trust, and noted the irregular activity. His reply came less than an hour later. This is actionable. Let's move on, revocation first thing tomorrow. I added the statement to the binder, this time under a tab marked high-level breach. The trust had been touched, but not destroyed. I still had time to reclaim it. But something in me shifted. This wasn't just about discipline or restitution anymore. This was about lineage. And the damage had just gone generational. By Tuesday morning, I was seated across from the trust officer at Trident Wealth, a thick folder in my lap, and a ballpoint pen already uncapped. The building sat like a vault itself, cold, efficient, impersonal, but that suited me fine. I wasn't there for comfort. I was there to take back what should never have been touched. The young woman at the desk, Ms. Patel, reviewed the paperwork I'd brought. The trust agreement, my annotated statement, Monroe's brief, and a printed copy of the email he'd sent confirming the breach. "Do you have any indication of how your son gained access?" she asked, without judgment, just procedure. "Only suspicion," I answered. "But I have evidence of misuse. The funds went to an account linked to his fiancée. That alone warrants removal." She nodded and began typing. Revoking privileges required formal reassignment of administrative authority, which I held. Monroe had already drafted the form. I signed it in triplicate while Miss Patel retrieved a notary. We filed the revocation, effective immediately. Elijah was no longer to receive updates, initiate transfers, or be mentioned in trust correspondence beyond his final beneficiary status. No more backdoors. No more quiet withdrawals hidden in paperwork he assumed I'd never read. When I stepped back outside, the sun hit hard against the pavement, but I didn't slow down. I walked straight to the post office 2 blocks away and mailed Monroe the signed originals via Priority Certified. Receipt requested. I watched the clerk weigh the envelope, attach the barcode, and stamp the label. At 11:42 a.m., I took a photo of the receipt and texted it to Monroe. Filed. Copies inbound. He replied 3 minutes later. Got it. With this, we begin the demand sequence. I walked home with the binder tucked tightly under my arm, the new Trust Revocation tab peeking out like a fresh scar. I'd spent most of my life believing family ties were stronger than signatures. That morning taught me the opposite. Paper protects what love sometimes won't. He'd reached into a sacred space thinking I'd never notice. He hadn't counted on what I'd become when I did. That night, I sat at my kitchen table wearing 2 sweaters and a scarf, the heat turned off to conserve what little extra I had left. Georgia nights don't get brutal in early October, but still enough to press into your joints and make you notice what's missing. I wrapped my hands around a mug of lukewarm tea, the kind I used to make for Elijah when he had the flu as a child. Back then, he'd let his head rest on my lap and call me his hero. That memory didn't sting. It felt more like a foreign film I used to love, subtitles and all, now distant and hard to follow. The binder sat open beside me. I flipped through each tab slowly, page by page. Card statements, notarized forms, screenshots, the handwritten pin sealed in plastic. With every section, I felt something harden. Not bitterness, but resolve. For years, I told myself he'd grow into responsibility. That if I just gave a little more time, a little more grace, the man I raised would reappear. But people don't change because we hope they will. They change when we stop covering their damage. I'd built an entire ecosystem around denial, paying off bills quietly, replacing things without explanation, telling myself he was figuring it out. Now I saw the truth. I'd been subsidizing not just his life, but his image. Every reckless charge was a step on a stage he built, using my silence as scaffolding. And I let him. But not anymore. I wiped my eyes with the edge of my sleeve, stood up, and reheated a bowl of stew from the night before. No candles, no music, just the sound of the microwave humming as I moved through the motions. Even that felt like a win. Making something with my own hands, not waiting for apology or approval. After dinner, I scanned in the newly signed trust documents and saved them to a secure folder Monroe had created for the case. I labeled them clearly, added the date, and emailed a backup copy to myself. Then I zipped the binder shut and placed it on the top shelf of my closet, visible, reachable, but no longer a burden to carry from room to room. This wasn't grief. It was preparation. By Thursday, I'd stopped waiting for remorse. There would be no knock on the door, no envelope slid under it with an apology scribbled in his old cursive. Elijah wasn't going to show up with the dignity to speak face to face, not unless I forced the setting, and this time, I would control the space. So I wrote him a letter. Not a message, not a call. A formal invitation printed on plain ivory paper and signed in black ink. You are requested to attend a clarity meeting regarding financial misuse and family planning. Location: Zion Hill Baptist Church, Fellowship Hall. Date: Sunday, October 15th. Time: immediately following morning service. This meeting will be witnessed and documented. I brought 2 copies to Pastor Charles, who'd baptized Elijah at 13 and buried his father 8 years ago. He read it without interruption, then nodded. "I'll be there," he said. "Do you want anyone else present?" I answered with one name, Sister Alma from the finance board. She'd handled church accounts for decades and wasn't one to flinch when the numbers didn't match the story. Attorney Monroe would attend as well. I'd already briefed him and sent over a draft of the meeting outline. Charges, exhibits, restitution terms. He agreed that holding it at the church would add weight. Neutral ground, he called it, though I knew it wasn't neutral for either of us. I'd stood in that fellowship hall after baby showers, fish fries, revival nights. Now I'd stand there as a plaintiff, not a parent. I mailed the original invitation to Elijah's address with return receipt requested, hand-delivered a second copy to Risa's mailbox. Just in case. There would be no excuse, no confusion, no misremembered date. This wasn't a conversation to be had in passing or ignored through silence. It was an appointment with consequence. That evening, I placed one final version of the letter in my binder, under a new tab marked Scheduled Proceedings. The line between love and obligation had worn thin. It was time to clarify what remained. I didn't feel brave. Exactly. I felt ready. Sunday came with a gray sky and the kind of quiet that presses down on your chest. I sat through the service, with my hands folded tighter than usual, barely hearing the sermon. Pastor Charles spoke on truth and accountability, and I wondered how much of it was directed at me or toward the man sitting 2 pews behind me, head bowed like a child in detention. Elijah hadn't greeted me, didn't even look up. Risa sat beside him, her expression unreadable. At 12:45 sharp, we gathered in the fellowship hall. Pastor Charles, Sister Alma, Attorney Monroe, Risa, Elijah, and me. A tight circle of 6 chairs, no table between us, just air, truth, and tension. I had prepared folders for everyone, each one labeled with their names. Inside, printed copies of statements, screenshots, withdrawal records, and the revocation notice from Trident Wealth. I started with the basics: dates, charges, patterns. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask questions that invited excuses. I presented facts. One by one, I laid them down like bricks. The spa receipt, the hotel bar tab, the trust transfers labeled as moving expenses. Monroe spoke when needed, especially about the legal weight of the documents. Pastor Charles offered no sermon, only silence, and a steady gaze that didn't shift. When I reached the post-it note, the one with my pin in Elijah's handwriting, I held it in the plastic sleeve, without a word, for a full 5 seconds, before sliding it onto his folder. His face changed, just for a flicker, a brief crack in the performance. Risa looked from the post-it to the transfer summary, her mouth tightening. She leaned in slowly and whispered, "You said it was a gift." The room shifted then. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with that still tension when the floor drops out under someone's feet. Elijah tried to gather himself, reached for a smile that didn't land. "I was just trying to help build something for us," he mumbled. "Come on, Ma." "You always blow things out of," Monroe cut in. "The letter of restitution is now active. All accounts have been secured. You are not under arrest, but you are under scrutiny. Choose your next steps carefully." He didn't respond, just looked down. Elijah opened his mouth once more, but no sound came. The performance was cracking, not because of the documents. I don't think he even read past the headlines, but because Risa was no longer looking at him. Her hands were clenched tight on her lap, eyes locked on the transfer summary, with that expression people get when they finally realize they've been used as a pawn. "I told you I wasn't comfortable taking anything from your family," she said, voice barely above a whisper, but every word landed like weight on concrete. "You said it was cleared. You said she offered." He shifted in his chair, rubbed his jaw like he could massage the lie back into shape. "It's not like that. It's still family money. No." I cut in, voice steady. "It was trust money, meant for the grandchildren, not your lifestyle. Not steak dinners, not spa days, and certainly not hush transactions disguised as generosity." Pastor Charles leaned forward then, elbows on his knees, his tone quiet but firm. "Son, this isn't help. This is theft. Dressed up in excuses, but theft all the same." Elijah's mouth twisted, and for a moment, I saw the child in him, embarrassed, cornered, desperate to find someone to blame. But that boy was gone, and the man in front of me had made choices. "You always want control," he spat suddenly, eyes flaring with resentment. "Every move I make, you find a way to pull the strings." I didn't flinch. I'd been called worse by people who'd taken less. Control is what mothers use to keep their children safe. What you're angry about is consequence. The room held still. Sister Alma looked over her glasses, shaking her head slowly. Risa stood up without a word, folder still in hand, and walked toward the door. She didn't wait for him. She didn't even glance back. Elijah followed with his eyes but stayed seated, chest rising and falling like someone who'd just realized the game was over, and the referee had been watching the whole time. Nobody said goodbye. He left without looking at me. By 1:23 p.m., the fellowship hall was empty again, except for me, Monroe, and a stack of folders that no longer felt heavy. By Tuesday afternoon, Monroe called to let me know Risa had returned the full $9,000. He sounded surprised, but I wasn't. Some people only need to see the whole truth laid bare once. Her wire transfer came through from a separate account, accompanied by a typed apology. 1 page. No flowery language. No excuses. Just an acknowledgement of the harm and a quiet exit from the mess she'd stood too close to. She hadn't included a forwarding address. The firm added her letter to the file. Under a new tab I labeled Third-Party Resolution. I sat at the dining table with it in my hands, rereading the line. I was unaware of the nature of the funds. I take full responsibility for accepting what was not mine. The words weren't enough to undo the breach, but they were rare, clean, measured, without the stench of manipulation. It was the first time someone in this entire unraveling had returned anything without being forced. Elijah didn't respond. Not to the certified mail, not to the voicemail Monroe left, not to the 30-day resolution notice we'd sent before the trust violation moved into official proceedings. I wasn't surprised by that either. Silence was his favorite strategy when cornered. Let the dust settle, come back months later, pretending the collapse was mutual. But the difference now was that there would be nothing to return to. That evening, I drafted my own statement. Not for court, not for Monroe, but for me. A personal record of boundaries enforced. I wrote down every step I'd taken since the first charge at Bones, every action, every receipt, every signature. Then I wrote one line that I read out loud before filing it away. I am no longer available to be misused under the title of mother. I signed and dated it like a contract, folded it into a blank envelope and placed it in the back pocket of the binder. Then I turned off my phone. I didn't need any more alerts. Everything that mattered was already documented, already returned, or in the process of being reclaimed. And the rest? The rest could stay lost. On October 17th, the court stamped and notarized my motion for sole authority over the family trust. I was standing at the clerk's counter when the final seal went down, watching the thick, raised emblem press into the paper like a closing door. The process had taken 12 days, 2 notarized affidavits, 1 witness statement from Sister Alma, a financial breakdown prepared by Monroe, and copies of every transfer flagged as improper. The clerk passed the document back to me with a polite nod. "It's official," she said. I didn't smile, but I nodded back. It felt like finishing a marathon I hadn't trained for, but still ran anyway. From the courthouse, I drove straight to Trident Bank with the stamped order in hand. The air in the lobby smelled like toner and lemon polish, too clean for comfort. I waited 10 minutes before a private banker called me back. The same young woman, Ms. Patel, who'd processed the revocation 2 weeks earlier. She didn't ask many questions this time. She simply scanned the court document, double-checked my ID, and pulled up the safety deposit registry. "We'll change the lock and issue a new key," she said. "It's standard once sole control is granted." I watched her disappear into the back, and when she returned, she handed me a small velvet pouch. Inside, a new brass key, cool to the touch, solid in my palm. I closed my fingers around it before sliding it into the side pocket of my purse. That moment wasn't triumphant. It was clean, quiet. No music swelled, no revelation struck me. It was simply done. I signed the ledger, closed the binder with the updated trust papers now filed under final authority, and walked out without looking back. On the way to my car, I paused at a trash bin and threw away the old envelope labeled Elijah Account Activity, not to forget. Just to mark the end of a role I no longer agreed to play. Back home, I placed the key pouch in the drawer beside my passport and birth certificate. Things that prove identity. That day, I didn't just reclaim the trust, I reclaimed mine. The day after I secured the new trust key, I woke before sunrise, not out of anxiety, but habit. I brewed coffee, washed one cup, and sat by the window facing the parking lot. No phone in hand, no inbox to check, just quiet, and the low hum of a life rearranged. The velvet pouch sat on the table beside me, unopened. Not because I didn't trust it, but because I didn't need to keep looking at it to believe it was mine. For years, I'd lived with everything tucked in the wrong places. Power wrapped in politeness. Safety dressed up as sacrifice. I called it parenting, called it loyalty, called it survival. But it was self-erasure, plain and simple. What began with a missing birthday became a trail of thefts disguised as love, and silence mistaken for peace. I hadn't just rebuilt a financial wall. I'd torn down the myth that family meant immunity. After breakfast, I made one final update to my binder. A new divider, closure. Behind it, I slipped the final receipts. Court seal copy, Risa's return wire, Monroe's last correspondence confirming the file was now closed unless further action was required. No drama, no lawsuit, just a sealed record that told the truth, should anyone ever ask for it. Then I wrote 3 names on a fresh sheet of paper. My 2 grandsons and my niece in South Fulton. They were the next chapter. Not saviors, not heirs of burden, but the people who'd once asked me about recipes and stories and the old photos in the hallway. They'd never touched the trust, never asked for a dime. And now they would be the ones informed, protected, and included once I restructured the documents next quarter. Before lunch, I placed the binder in my fireproof box, locked it, and tucked the velvet pouch beside it. My purse felt lighter without the burden of monitoring. My shoulders, too. No apology had come from Elijah, and I'd stopped expecting one. What I'd gained was worth more, a name uncoiled from his debts, a future no longer anchored to guilt, and a key in a pouch that only opened doors I chose. The silence I sat with now was earned, not enforced. And that made all the difference.